Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Every week we try to go over one of the hadith from the 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi, and this week we are on hadith number 37. عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فيما يرويه عن ربه تبارك وتعالى قال إن الله كتب الحسنة والسيئة ثم بين ذلك فمن هم بحسنة فلم يعملها كتبها الله عنده حسنة كاملة وإن هم بها فعملها كتبها الله عنده عشر حسنة إلى 700 ضعف إلى أضعاف كثيرة وإن هم بسيئة فلم يعملها كتبها الله عنده حسنة كاملة وإن هم بها فعملها كتبها الله سيئة واحدة رواه Bukhari wa Muslim. So this is a very, 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 very beautiful hadith that I've been excited to go over for a while. So this is narrated by Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, and he narrated that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam narrated from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a hadith al-Qudsi, and he said, so this is the Prophet sallallahu saying that that Allah indeed He wrote and prescribed the good deeds and the bad deeds, and then He revealed this, and this is now the Prophet sallallahu quoting from Allah. Whoever intends to do one good deed and does not do it, he does not fulfill that good deed, then a full good deed will be written for him. And whoever intends to do a good deed and actually does the deed and is able to follow through with it, then Allah will write for him 10 deeds, the like of it, and then He will multiply it 700 times, and then will keep multiplying it like a lot of multiplications, like many multiplications after that. And if he intends to do one bad deed but does not do that bad deed, then they will actually get one good deed for not doing the bad deed they intended to do. And if they intend to do one bad deed and they commit that bad deed, then they get one bad deed written for them. And this is a sahih narration narrated by Imam Bukhari and Muslim. So it's an incredible, incredible hadith. Like if you can imagine it as like a 2x2 table, like you either intend good and you do it, you get 700 times many, many, many other good deeds. And if you just have an intention, you don't actually follow through with it, you get still a good deed for not doing it. And if you intend bad and you don't do it, then you get a good deed for not doing it. And there's only one situation where you can get a sin, and that is you get one sin for doing the bad deed, which is like the odds are so stacked in our favor. So we'll try to go into a little more detail. Sisters, feel free to scoot forward. If you can't hear me, just let me know. So this is an example of a hadith Qudsi, which we've come over just a few times in this collection so far. Hadith Qudsi is just kind of like a reminder. It's basically the Prophet ﷺ is quoting Allah. So, usually in the hadith, we're quoting the Prophet ﷺ's own words. He's saying it how he wants it. Whereas here he's quoting Allah directly. He's saying this is what Allah has said, but it's not part of the Quran. It's different than the recitation of the Quran. And so really this kind of breaks it down into 4 kinds of people. And the first is the person who intends good and actually does it. So what is a good deed? Like when we mention these good deeds that people are intending to do or not intending to do, what is a good deed? So some people have tried to define what a good deed is, and it's really in the essence, anything that our deen, anything our religion encourages us to do is a good deed. Whether it's something that's prescribed, like a fard prayer, for example, or something that's optional or recommended, like a sunnah prayer, or something like giving extra charity. These are things like whatever, whether it's like an obligatory act or an extra act, all these things are good deeds. Sharia, like a lot of times when we're talking about Sharia, we think of it, we translate it in English in our minds, we translate it to laws, which doesn't really capture it. It makes it very kind of cold and hard and like this thing that's kind of like control us. So like Sheikh Mufti Kamani, who I'm getting these lectures from, he mentioned a very beautiful way to kind of look at Sharia, rather than looking at it as just like the set of laws, really look at it as kind of like the set of like it's a kind of path to help us like earn the love of Allah and to love Allah ourselves. That's really what it is. That's all. Like the whole point of Sharia is to allow us to be most pleasing to Allah and allow us to love Allah properly. And so that's a kind of like a beautiful way when we look at the rules of Islam, like the purpose of it. And when we look at our deeds, rather than looking at it as like cold hard cash, just like currency, this very transactional thing, we're trying to just like increase deeds. There's 2 problems with that. One is if we think of it as currency, then we fall into this error where sometimes we feel like we're better off, we're wealthy, and so we can afford to either not do as many good deeds, or we can even afford some sins. It's a very wrong way of looking at the deeds. And another part of it is also then we think that we're earning Jannah, or we're earning the pleasure of Allah, I'm buying Jannah somehow if I've earned enough good deeds. And that's not the point of it at all. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned in a hadith where he said that, and I'm like going to paraphrase it, that nobody ever in the history of mankind has ever earned Jannah, not even the prophets. He said that even if someone was to worship Allah for 8 years straight, doing nothing else, just worship for 8 years perfectly straight, that person wouldn't even be able to pay back Allah for one eyeball. And so, let alone everything is given us in this world, let alone Jannah, which is greater than anything in this world. So nobody, not even and the Sahaba even asked, they were astonished, like, not even you, O Messenger of Allah, like, not even you're going to earn Jannah? And he said, not even me. So none of us are going to earn Jannah. It's going to be something that Allah gives us through His mercy. And so our deeds are just us trying to get closer and closer to that mercy so that we become more deserving of it. And so that's just kind of like a way we frame these deeds to start off this conversation. And this mentality of the deeds being multiplied, sins being reduced, this comes up a lot in different hadith and in the Quran. In Surah Al-An'am, for example, verse 160, Allah also mentions that each deed is worth 10. And so if you imagine it, if we do, like 1 year's worth of deeds, that's like doing 10 years worth of deeds. If we live a lifetime worth of good deeds, let's say we live like 60 years, that's 600 years worth of deeds minimum. Like that's the bare minimum is 600 years worth of deeds. And a beautiful reflection on this is that sometimes we'll read the stories of like Adam or Nuh, who they both lived to about 950 years old. And we say, like, how can we compete with that? People who lived centuries and they did great deeds. How are we ever going to compete if we live 60, 70, 80, 90 years? And here's an opportunity for us where our deeds are actually being multiplied for us so that we can now compete against these amazing people who lived for much longer periods doing good deeds. And so what's also another in the Quran, it also mentions that there's a verse that mentions that Allah will multiply your good deeds by 700 times. It's also mentioned in the Quran. And what's interesting about that is that after that, Allah mentions, Wallahu yudha'ifu liman yasha. So like Allah will multiply for whom He wills. So like Allah will give basically as much as He wants. The 700 just kind of like throwing a number or like giving a minimum. And what's interesting, actually, Ibn Umar, radiallahu anhu, a Sahabi, he mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ actually, after this verse was revealed, he made dua to Allah that Allah actually multiplies even more than that, more than 700. And so then Allah reveals in Surah Al-Baqarah, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَقْرِضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا يُضَاعِفُ لَهُ أَضْعَافًا كَثِيرًا. Like He will multiply for him many, many multiplications. And then the Prophet ﷺ made dua even after that, and he said, like, multiply even more than that. And then Surah Zumar comes down after describing the righteous people and people who are doing goods and striving for goodness. He will then like multiply for them بِغَيْرِ حِسَاب, like without even counting. Like imagine like the image we have maybe of someone who's just like so wealthy that when they go to pay, they just pull out like a wad of hundreds, they plop it down, they like keep the change. Like this is kind of like the image, like Allah is like the richest, and He's saying like بِغَيْرِ حِسَاب, He's going to multiply for you without even counting. And so this is also, first of all, showing us the mercy of Allah, and then also showing us the love of the Prophet ﷺ had for us and the dua he's making on our behalf always. And there's other hadith, like Abu Hurairah mentions, like other hadiths where Allah like multiplies 1,000 times, which is their way of saying 1,000,000. And so, there's many other hadith that talk about this multiplying effect. So basically, this should just be like, like when something's on sale, everyone rushes to get something on sale. Like good deeds in this life, we're given to it like on sale. Like you're given so many multiplications. So if someone is gonna like say like multiply your paycheck by 10 times, you're gonna be so excited to show up to work. So this should be our excitement every single day. The minimum is 10 times for our deeds. And for students, even if you're making no paycheck, you still get multiplied. 0. Yeah, 0 times 10 is 0. So the other point that comes up here is that the sins are then, if like you take this for the example of good deeds, being worth multiple lifetimes worth, then sins are 1, limited to what we actually do, not just our intentions, and then 2, they're also limited just within our lifetime. It's just what we commit in this lifetime. The exception to that being if we inspire other people to do sin, and then people start doing sin because of our example, then we can take a part of that burden with us. And the other thing about sins also is that they might not be multiplied in the same way, but some sins are obviously inherently worse than others. So maybe the same sin committed at a special time or a special place, for example, can make it a greater sin. So for example, if you can imagine like doing a sin inside the haram, right, and like next to the Kaaba, is much greater than doing a sin somewhere else. And doing a sin maybe like in Ramadan is greater than doing a sin outside Ramadan. And so, the sins too can be magnified by a certain, depending on its context, but it's not multiplied in the same way that good deeds are. And then we come to the example of someone who intends to do good, but, doesn't actually follow through with it. And so here the scholars try to make a kind of distinction between different kinds of intentions, like who is this really talking about? And so they mention 3 examples. One is the person who fully intends to do it, like a deed, but then they're incapable. So let's say someone wants to go do Hajj, but then they become sick or they don't have enough money, and they pass away before they're able to do Hajj. That person who had the full intention, like they really were planning to do it, but for things outside of their circuit, like their capacity, they weren't able to do it. Those people get the full reward of that deed. And then there's the, like, not like the ×1, like the ×10, like it's as if they did it. And then there's some people who intend to do good, but then because of a good greater than it, they don't do the first good that they were planning to do. So let's say like maybe you came to the masjid a little early, you wanted to pray 2 sunnah, like 2 rak'ah sunnah, and then someone needs your help. So you go help them out and you miss the sunnah. Then the scholars have said that you actually get the deeds of both of those actions. And then there's that person who maybe like intended to do good, but became lazy, got distracted, pulled up YouTube instead of like doing that like thing that they wanted to do. That person, then that's the person that's mentioned in this hadith who gets the good deed for the intention, but doesn't actually get the deed for the action, the deeds for the actions. So what's the takeaway lesson from all this is that no matter what the situation, we should always be intending to do good, because no matter what, like even if we don't think we're actually going to be able to commit or fulfill the action, even if we're just always in a state of doing intentions, then our default becomes we're intending to do good. And by having that intention always being our default, it's going to make it more likely that we actually do good. So let's say like a good example Sheikh brought up is that like let's just, for example, like intend to do tahajjud. There's a hadith narrated by Abu Darda, and he mentions that someone who came, he intends to wake up for tahajjud, he went to sleep, but then he just slept through it. Didn't wake up for his alarms, didn't wake up for anything. He said that person still gets the reward of doing the tahajjud. So then like what's the like excuse for us to not just at least set an alarm, set an intention to try to wake up for tahajjud? Even if we don't do it, we get the reward of tahajjud. And then sometimes we will wake up for tahajjud and we'll actually do the tahajjud. So it's just like we should always be in a state of like trying to intend to do good. And the beautiful kind of also story that was mentioned is Abu Kabsha mentioned there's 4 kinds of people. One is that there is people who have knowledge and wealth. And those, he said, are like the best people because those are people who are able to use their wealth wisely. They're able to donate for the right causes, use their wealth for investments in the hereafter. Then he mentioned those people who have knowledge but they don't have wealth. That's not within their capacity at all. And he says that those people, if they were to have wealth, they had the intention that they would spend it well. And those people get the same reward because even though they don't have the wealth, they would intend to spend it well. Then there's people who have no knowledge and they have wealth. And those people are very dangerous because then they waste it, they can fall into the extravagances of the life, they can spend it in ways that are like against what Allah would like. And then there's people, he said, that don't have knowledge and they don't have wealth. And what's really sad about that is that even though they don't have the wealth, if they had the wealth, they would have intended to do what wealthy people who have no knowledge do. They would have intended to do sins, like they wanted to use this money in the wrong way. And so that's kind of like a sad situation to be in. So just also an encouragement to always be in a state of doing the right intentions, even if we don't have the means in the moment. And then here the word mentioned in this hadith is ham, which we have translated to intend, but in Arabic maybe the better translation is really to incline. And there's 5 levels of inclination, like in the Arabic language it's very nuanced, and there's 5 different levels. There's first is hajis, which I've never heard before, and then there's khatir, and then there's hadith nafs, and then there's ham, and then there's azm. So those are kind of like 5 levels. So hajis, I think is the word for it, is like, let's say like a thought just kind of comes and pops in your mind. Hajis. So that's like something that like maybe just pops in your mind once, you never really think about it. Khatir is something that like it's kind of like the thoughts come up to your mind a few times, but you don't really dwell on it when it comes. Then there's hadith al-nafs, that's like when you're starting to entertain the idea, you're kind of talking to yourself about the idea. And then ham is like when you've started to incline towards doing it, like now it's become like an intention that you want to do this thing. And then there's azam, which is like a full intention, almost like maybe an obsession in some cases, that you're going to do this no matter what. And so some scholars here have tried to make the distinction between these kinds, because they say azam for like a bad deed, like someone who is just always thinking about that bad deed, or like they plan to do it, and if nothing stopped them, they're like, for example, like they went to buy a weapon and they're planning to go do like a massacre or something. Like that person's going to get the sin for trying to, like, for that level of intention. Whereas the intention where someone is still kind of thinking about it, debating it, and then they decide not to do it, that's the one where they mention like is the person who's forgiven for not following through with the sin. So that's kind of like an interesting distinction in terms of intentions. And then obviously like Allah knows what's inside of our hearts, and so this is kind of like a conversation about like there's been like difference of opinion with scholars whether we're held accountable for the things that we think about. And this is maybe a common question that comes up a lot, is like, will Allah judge us for what we think about? And what was, there's been like a lot of discussion throughout the centuries about like what the right answer to that question is, but maybe like the closest to the truth that most people agreed upon today, like the majority opinion, is that if we think about something and like we don't resist the thought, like let's say we have an evil thought in our minds, if we entertain it and we invite it in and we allow ourselves to just keep thinking about it, that's something that can be sinful. Like that is an action, like that in itself is an action that we keep dwelling on these thoughts. Whereas when we resist the thought, like let's say something comes in and we resist it and it comes back later and we kind of like push it out, or we just kind of like be like, oh, I don't think this is right, that's something that gets rewarded. You get a good deed for that, because then you're resisting like dwelling in that state. And so that was also an interesting conversation. And so obviously just also to purify our minds, purify our intentions. It's kind of like the beauty of this hadith. Just the major takeaways is that one, Allah has stacked this whole world, this test in our favor, which is incredible. Two, that it's all about our intentions, and like even if we're not able to do the actions, that's not up to our hands always. So just have the intentions there. And then three is that if there are evil thoughts in our heads, that we have to try to stop it, at least put some action towards stopping those. And just think about the roots, like where are these thoughts coming from? Is it because of a situation I'm in, the environment I'm putting myself in? Then try to address those things at the root. And the last thing is that these are just like proofs of Allah's infinite mercy, and how His mercy sometimes even greater than, He's focused on His mercy is greater than His focus on the justice. And it just gives us a love of Allah, and that makes us look forward to meeting Allah, inshallah. So may Allah multiply our deeds and forgive us for all of our sins, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for your patience.